Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But without further ado, let's go towards the different topics that we are going to discuss during the course of this show. We'll begin with the IMF and how the IMF MD has recently said a statement, and in fact she has praised Pakistan's performance as far as the review of the IMF is concerned. We know that the delegation of the IMF is here in Pakistan and they have met with various persons. They've had meetings as well with the concerned departments in Pakistan as well, and they seem to be extremely satisfied by the outcome of it all. This is going to be, we'll start with this story. Then we'll be talking about Israel and Palestine, the latest as far as this conflict is concerned, the number of casualties that have happened, the raid on the Al-Shifa hospital that has claimed lives, and of course the world pressure on Israel not to turn this into a war inside the hospital and to spare the lives of the children and the women. But this said, if you look at the casualties inside of Gaza, the majority of those are women and children. 200,000 people have already fled Gaza and have gone elsewhere. But this situation, where is all of this going to lead to? Ultimately, is what Israel want is a demarcation of Gaza, of people to go towards one end of Gaza and then ultimately to go to Sinai in Egypt, or are there other speculations that are also slowly and steadily taking shape inside the Israeli minds? We will be highlighting that in our second story. Then we'll be talking about Xi Jinping, who is in US after a period of around 6 years. This is a very, very important development. These are two countries that have had dissimilarities, or let's put it that, different statements as far as issues concerning trade, concerning relations are concerned. This rapprochement between the US and China is being seen by a lot of quarters as a very positive development between the two countries. What is it going to lead to is the ultimate question, and we will be highlighting different aspects of that. We can only talk about that. That is up to the Chinese and the Americans to decide what they want to do as the outcome of this is concerned. Then protests have erupted, ladies and gentlemen, in China over mine and a failed tunnel rescue that hasn't happened in Uttarakhand. Accusations against authorities have also mounted as far as attack response is concerned. Machines broke down as far as this tunnel rescue operation in Uttarakhand in India is concerned. Debris, mud worsened situation for the trapped workers, and of course this is creating a crisis-like situation for those who are trapped inside. Then we'll be talking about North Korea that has conducted static tests on solid fuel engine. These successful tests of intermediate range ballistic missile engines have not only generated positivity within North Korea, but around the world they have generated a lot of skepticism as to what the ultimate game plan of North Korea is. Then we'll be talking about toxic smog in Lahore that has triggered a health crisis. The smog level had decreased, air pollution level had improved considerably because of rains, but now it is back with a vengeance, and you can see in the images in the parallel window that the smog has kind of engulfed Lahore as such, and it has made health conditions worsen. What is going to happen, is the government going to do as a result of this? We'll be highlighting that in our last story. Let's begin without further ado with our leading story, and that concerns the IMF MD who was interviewed by Bloomberg, and she said, while they asked about other things, but also they asked about Pakistan, because the IMF delegation is in Pakistan. And Christina Georgieva told Bloomberg that IMF is asking for tax collection to be at least 15% of gross domestic product. But she also commented on Islamabad's efforts and commended them, saying that it had been sticking to the program despite all of the difficulties. This is a positive development as far as the delegation level talks between the IMF and Pakistan that are happening as we speak. They are also looking forward, and they are meeting different delegates as well here in Islamabad to see the overall situation as far as this SBA that it has given of $3 billion US, the next tranche of which is about to be released, and this meeting is extremely pertinent in the whole context of when and how this tranche will be released. They are saying that it might be released in the month of December. Nevertheless, the caretaker finance minister Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba has also said that Pakistan has assured the IMF of following austerity and reducing government expenditure to control the budget deficit. So a positive environment between the IMF and Pakistan. A positive comment from the IMF head shows that things are moving in the right direction. Let's come now to our second story, and that concerns Palestine-Israel, the conflict that has now entered its second month. The main story today has been the Al-Shifa hospital raid and how the West is extremely concerned about the children and the women be spared. But will that happen? Because seeing the past of what Israel has been doing in Palestine, neither the women nor the children have been spared as far as this is concerned. We've been joined by Jauhar Saleem Saab. He's a former foreign secretary and somebody who understands diplomacy much, much better than I do. Thank you very much, Jauhar Saleem Saab, who have joined us. Jauhar Saleem Saab, reports about soldiers entering the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. How is that going to impact the international perception of this conflict? There's a lot of pressure on Israel to not have more casualties as far as women and children are concerned. But will that actually happen?
Unfortunately, the situation is heading towards a gloomier scenario. I think I had, in my past interviews on this topic in recent days, mentioned that if there is not a concerted effort by Muslim countries, which succeeds these two preconditions, and there's enough pressure on the Western world and resultantly Israel, this would unfortunately be a massacre. And that is what has happened so far. 11,000 casualties have taken place.
And now that is the casualty hasn't been updated as of yet, but when it does, with what is happening in Al-Shifa hospital, I'm sure that the casualties are going to increase.
Exactly, that's a very conservative figure because there are other figures circulating around as well. And the bombing, there has been no letdown, and now there has been this raid on the biggest hospital there, which was perhaps the only medical facility of any standard which is working there to some extent. Now this is unprecedented in many ways, and for many people this constitutes a war crime. But then so many other actions that have taken place in recent days, they also constitute war crimes. Unfortunately, what we see in the Western world, and I was recently in London on a private visit, we saw the demonstrations that have taken place in London.
And massive demonstrations.
Hundreds of thousands of people, much bigger demonstrations than what we saw in any Muslim country. And by the way, these demonstrations were, in terms of the constitution, very multi-faceted or multi-ethnic. It was not just Muslims. There were Christians, there were Jewish, there were white, there were blacks, and sort of people of all shades and creeds. But it seems that even that has not, and subsequently we saw the interior minister, the home minister there had to resign, the home secretary of the UK, Ms. Weller, because she had made some remarks about the previous demonstrations there. But despite that, I don't really see, I don't envisage a change in the policy of major Western countries. They have been calling for a humanitarian pause. And
but what does a humanitarian pause mean? Because this is another question that a lot of people have been asking themselves as well on social media. What is the difference between a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause?
Yeah, these are interesting terms because ceasefire is a recognized standard term, basically, which means cessation of hostilities. Ceasefire does not constitute a termination of a war, because for that there has to be a formal declaration. But ceasefires can last sometimes years and even more. Humanitarian pause, on the other hand, they're talking about days, 4 days or 3 days or 5 days or whatever. And actually, some analysts would say a humanitarian pause, quote unquote, would help the Israelis in some ways, because they have been putting a lot of pressure to ensure that the people, the Palestinians, as many as possible, would leave that area and shift to the southern Gaza or leave Gaza entirely. So a humanitarian pause, I believe at some point could happen, but then again the Israelis would just endeavor that during that humanitarian pause there's more sort of displacement, more relocation of the Palestinians. And there is a huge debate here. For example, there's this motion which is expected to be presented in the British Parliament to have a vote on this ceasefire, so that there's a resolution on ceasefire. Now, this SNP, Scottish National Party, is the political group which is really supporting that. The British Labour Party is not. Keir Starmer has made it very clear. Conservative Party is not. But the Scottish Labour Party, which is headed by a Pakistani origin MP, Anas Sarwar, that segment is a little sort of, right now in a situation where they're yet to decide, although they're likely to vote with whatever way Labour says, but there could be some mini revolt, like as per some analysts. In some other countries as well, some other Western countries as well, we see pressure being applied by the human rights groups, by the public at large, by sort of, some political groups as well. But we haven't really seen clear pressure by the governments or clear statements by the government. And also what we have seen in the United Nations is a stalemate again. Because theoretically speaking, the right forum for a ceasefire is the United Nations Security Council.
That is why the United Nations was established in the first place, in fact.
Exactly. Basically, it was for these type of conflicts, the United Nations, and particularly the United Nations Security Council, and their resolutions can be binding as well on the countries, and if they don't go by those resolutions,
but what if the
sometimes
United Nations Security Council, as is going to happen, are negotiating a new resolution demanding humanitarian pauses in Gaza. Now, if this resolution is accepted, what is the implication as far as a pause or a ceasefire is concerned? Can a pause be transformed into a ceasefire if the conditions allow that?
Theoretically, yes, but it depends on Israel, whether it suits them or not.
But it doesn't suit Israel, to be very frank, Jauhar Sahib. The way we've seen the statements by Netanyahu, it doesn't seem that the Israeli government is anyhow wanting to de-escalate the tensions with Palestine.
In my past comments, public comments on this issue, unfortunately what I had projected is coming true, which was not a very pretty scenario. I had said that Netanyahu, because his political future is at stake, so he could be as reckless as required from his perspective. And that's what we are seeing now. You see, because right now he's heading what he calls a war cabinet. You see, there was a lot of voices in Israel which suggesting that he had failed in protecting the Israelis, particularly
there was
the
also
settlers.
pressure on him as well, and there was the comment from one of the ministers that we cannot sack Netanyahu under the present circumstances.
Yeah. So as long as this conflict lasts, of course, he survives as well. And then he wants to do things which the Israelis would deem good enough to think that he's the right person to continue leading them. He already had an unprecedented tenures of government in Israel, and he's a great survivor, and he's a very, very shrewd person. And he has the support from the US. Actually, as per in the US political scenario, Democrats and the Republicans, they generally vie with each other in portraying their support and lending their support to Israel. And in fact, as we saw, when that allocation was approved for Israel, emergency allocation of billions of dollars, it was like a bipartisan effort.
But we also have Ilan Omar, representatives like her, who also raise a voice for the Palestinians.
Yeah, but these are lone voices.
But this said, I'd like to understand another perspective, Jauhar Sahib. You talked about justice. Let's talk about the International Court of Justice, where Pakistan and 12 others have filed comments on the probe into Israeli action and Palestinian authorities, because you talked about war crimes, and that is what a lot of people are talking about, whether it be the ICC or the ICJ, and we see some kind of development as far as that is concerned. Will that lead to something? Will Israel be implicated as the perpetrator of war crimes, as per the ICJ, what is going on in ICJ or in the ICC?
It's hard to envision that. ICJ and ICC, they have gotten involved in such conflicts in the past. For instance, in Ukraine, in the Ukraine conflict, we saw that involvement. Previously, during the Bosnian War and its aftermath, the court got heavily involved, and certain personalities were sentenced as well. But to see that happening against Israel, given its clout in the world, in the Western world in particular, and all these international institutions, they have a great deal of, the West has a great deal of influence in these institutions. So I think at this point in time, it's hard to see that. But of course, it all depends from here on, where does the conflict go? Because
now, when you talk of where the conflict is going, let's revert back and go back to where we started the conversation, that is Al-Shifa Hospital. Now, US says and Israel say that Hamas is in fact hiding in hospitals, and that is why they are being bombarded. Hamas has rejected these claims about using Gaza hospitals for military purposes. Who's saying the truth? How and when will we ascertain who is on the right path and who isn't? But at the end of the day, when you bomb hospitals or when you enter hospitals, who are the casualties? It is not those with the arms, it is the children and the women who are in the wards who would need attention, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. First of all, Israelis have been alleging that there's a command and control center of Hamas. Actually, they say that the main command center is under this hospital. There's a tunnel network. People have been talking about the tunnel network, which has also been called the Gaza Metro, because they say that the tunnel network is very, very extensive, and that's where Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qasim Brigade, keeps its weaponry and rockets, and they have their hideouts. So, but these reports have been sort of, they have been there for years, and the type of network, as per the Israeli accusations, has to be very, very extensive. Now, if they claim that the command center is there, then I think that there has to be some evidence. So they should lay the evidence bare before the world to see, because Hamas has categorically denied it. So now, so here the words don't matter. What matters is the evidence. So whoever has the evidence, and at this point in time, so far Israel has not shown any evidence.
Remember, the whole thing began with the Israel insinuating that babies had been killed by Hamas, which turned out to be a false information and false news that was also negated later by the White House. But the fact is, it was a bit too late in the day when that news came, that the operation had already begun.
Yeah, these days, that's a problem, because people sometimes don't see the subsequent news items. It's only the first main big headline which counts. Even the death toll was subsequently, it was, Israelis at one point claimed 1,400 killed. Then subsequently, the number was downgraded to 1,200, which is the number they are claiming now, and 200 hijacked. So basically, yes, I think in the war, they say or such military conflicts, the first casualty is the truth. So it's very hard to decipher.
When you say the first casualty is the truth, do you feel that the West is gaining ground as far as narrative building is concerned on this conflict?
I think I had sort of, I may mention here that some of my Western friends had mentioned that this attack by Hamas on 7th of October was something that the West will never forget, and this would really destroy the credibility of Palestinian political organizations. But I had said to them, I had felt that what would be more important would be Israel's response. And once in Gaza, if they're sort of, from the Israeli side, if there's brutalities or state terrorism far greater than what the Hamas is accused of, then people might forget that and remember what is happening now. because these headlines and these images on the TV screens that people see every day now,
Social media.
and social media, which is even more important these days, it's of course it moves and touches everybody, because when you and what is happening in Al Shifa hospital now as we speak, as the soldiers are marching there from one room to another, and we know the reports whereby some babies had to be put off those incubators. They were to be literally letting them die.
But Jauhar Saleem Saab, at the end of the day, will humanity forget or forgive those who were behind these? I'm not talking in the short term, but say when this conflict is over and whatever the repercussions might be, will Israel be forgiven?
Well, I think history does not forget and history does not forgive.
You still talk about the Nazis and Adolf Hitler and how he had done whatever he did to the Jewish community, and we still talk about it as far as narrative is concerned. Do you think we will still talk about what Israel did in Palestine a couple of years down the lane?
I think, whatever is happening, and these days it's even harder to obliterate the footprints of whatever you do because of the media, the social media and everything. All those images which are sort of being captured on your cell phones everywhere these days, and then they're transmitted through social media or mainstream media. So I don't think people will forget that. Now, I think the more important question is whether Israel could live with that, whether the impact would be nothing greater than what they have seen in the past.
Because it's very strange. It's that victim. I'm not a psychologist, but looking at the things, it just looks as if the victims of what happened after the Second World War or during the Second World War by Germany towards the Jewish community is what they are doing exactly to the Palestinian people now in one form or the other. Is it some kind of revenge tactic? Is it some kind of a psychological tactic? I don't understand. But there's so much of a similitude in the way the barbaric actions are continuing that you can't help but be reminded of that.
I mean, the Israelis are claiming that, I think it's very clear. I mean, they're claiming that they want to sort of disarm or in their words, defang Hamas, or eliminate the military wing of Hamas. But I think that their objectives seem to be more than that. The objective is to eliminate Hamas itself, first of all, and make sure that they never get into the government there. Then the objective is to perhaps control this area more than it was sort of directly controlled by Israel before. Another objective could have been that, if the situation worsens and some Palestinians leave the area, it would be better for them, because this is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, and that creates problems for Israel as well.
But Israel has self-occupied those lands, and that is why the Palestinians are, concentrated in one area, because the other lands have been occupied.
Exactly. And now they feel that, this heavy concentration of humanity in that particular area of Palestinians constitutes a security issue for them. So I think unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a sort of,
a simple way forward or a simple solution to all of this issue. Where a lot of people talk about the two-state solution as well, but even then there are so many complexities with a thin line between the West Bank and Gaza and Israel in between. I don't know how, whenever a two-state solution is envisaged, how will that be implemented in a letter and spirit? And there are a lot of questions marked on that. We could have continued on and on, Jauhar, but we're a bit short of time, so I'll have to bid you farewell from this. Thank you so very much to have joined us, Jauhar Saleem Saab, former Foreign Secretary, and of course a seasoned diplomat who understands how world diplomats function or how diplomacy functions, and that is why nobody better than you to give us an overview on how and where this could turn towards. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the visit of Xi Jinping to the United States of America. Now, under the theme of creating a resilient and sustainable future for all leaders, ministers and officials, will also going to further apex work across various range of policy, and that is under the ambit of which the Chinese president is in the United States of America. There are three priorities that are interconnection, innovation, inclusivity, and this is how the whole meeting is going on between the Chinese side and the US side. But the very interesting thing is that the Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in San Francisco in the United States of America after a long hiatus, after what have been so many issues between the United States of America and China, and tensions that have only increased in the last few years. Now, to discuss that and more, we've been joined by Dr. Qamar Cheema online, who's a foreign affairs expert. Qamar Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. It's a pleasure to have you here in the show, and it's interesting because of the different aspects around APEC and this visit of the Chinese president. In this context, I'll begin with you. In this context of the APEC economic leaders meeting in San Francisco, what do you feel? How do you feel the Chinese president's presence could change, enhance, improve APEC, B, the already tense situation between the US and China?
Thank you very much, Sahib. I think the important thing is that the meeting of President Biden and President Xi Jinping, the American side was very worried that how the meeting is going to go. So for that matter, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in Washington last month to engage with the Americans that how we have to move on, because there is a pressure on the United States, and that pressure is that there is a growing concern from the business community and from the American partners and allies as well. And that concern is that if America goes for decoupling from the Chinese with China, which recently the Secretary of Treasury of the United States has just said that we are not going to decouple, but we are going to de-risk our economy with China. So they're trying to win over their friends. They're trying to win over so many businessmen in America because they are dependent with the trade with the China. So I think first of all, this particular meeting, which is going to be in San Francisco, that's giving a message that the Chinese and the Americans are still talking. Secondly, despite the fact that the American side is working for a competition with the Chinese in Indo-Pacific, they still want to stay engaged, and this is what the American side is saying, that we want to compete and we don't want any kind of a conflict with the Chinese. But at the same time, the way Americans are building coalitions, having partners and investing in the entire Indo-Pacific region in the backyard of China, the Chinese are really, they believe that we have to be very careful. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, if the American allies, they're very much worried that in case the Americans demand or they ask that they have to disengage at some point from the Chinese, how we have to do this. So for that matter, if you see that the Chinese and European trade is at a very high level, so nobody is going to listen to the Americans when it comes to lowering the trade or reducing the trade volume, looking at the level of the dependence there. So that is why the Americans are saying that we are going for decoupling. We are not going for decoupling. We are not going for coupling. We are going for de-risking. So in my understanding, it's a good move. It's a good meeting. It could be a good meeting for the stability in Indo-Pacific, for the stability at the global state, and particularly after this COVID crisis, which the international community saw. We cannot afford where the great powers can reach to a point that could be dangerous, or that could be problematic for the developing nations, particularly those who are dependent on the supply chain on China. So it seems it's going to be a good initiative, and the trust deficit, which already there is some sort of improvement could be there, but to expect so much from this, I don't think that should be a very good idea.
But of course, the Chinese president is here, Qamar Cheema, under the ambit of the APEC. The importance of APEC is also manifold. Do you feel that both the countries could work together despite their differences in certain arenas to strengthen APEC and indirectly also to diffuse tensions between each other, because this is what the world is looking at currently? When you see Xi Jinping in San Francisco, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind, oh my God, the Chinese leader is in the US. Are we looking at de-escalation of tensions? Are we looking towards some kind of a working relationship between China and the US? What's your take on that?
Well, I think this Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, this is 30th leaders meeting. I think that is very significant, and some 3 billion people are part of that initiative, and this accounts for 37% of the world's population, which is about 62% of the global GDP, and that is also 47% of the international trade. So obviously this particular block is very much important, but I think the most important point here is that they need to keep engaging, they need to keep talking, they need to keep cooperating, and that's only way I think things can move on. At this moment, what it seems that the American side is more interested to have more allies, more friends in the region, where the Chinese side is trying to win over the international community through its goodwill, through its idea that we believe in idea of shared growth, we believe in the idea of comprehensive security. So I think both the countries they are trying to create leverage through different means, and particularly the way the Americans created a sort of hue and cry on this on Taiwan issue, where the American leadership, people from the American Congress, people like Nancy Pelosi, they came, and now we have seen that the industry has started moving from Taiwan to other countries, and at the same time the industry is moving from China to India. So I think if we look at both countries are creating leverage, they're trying to win over people, and for example countries like India, they are being asked to start working on global south and try to get the leadership of global south, where the Chinese have their own idea of global south, India has global own idea of global south. So I think it's basically the entire question that how to have more leverage, how to have more access, and how to win over allies and friends, and particularly since the Chinese are not working to change the global political system, they are not working much on changing the global order through their political framework. They only believe that we have to engage from the spectrum of economy. So for that matter, the Chinese idea of comprehensive security, shared growth, that is very much welcoming, and nobody feels threatened, particularly even those who are the American allies, that the China will change their system, or trying to create or trying to indulge in the internal matters. But at the same time, for the Americans, it gets very difficult and tough at times, because when they arm friends, when they create insecurities at time to the countries in the region, particularly in Indo-Pacific, majority of the countries, they want the support of the Chinese or the Americans for non-traditional security threats like floods, like earthquakes, like tsunamis, in all these areas, and particularly this environment crisis. But this is where they need the support of the great powers rather than getting into the military competition. So it's a question of APEC, it's a question of creating leverage. And I think this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, as I mentioned, it's a big forum of 3 billion people. And I think the Americans and Chinese, they will try to create more leverage, more access, and they will try to have more partners and allies in this platform. And I think here I would just try to link here with Pakistan as well, that Pakistan needs to see that much of the future of the global, of the international history will be written in this part of the world. And we must create a sort of a leverage or engagement, start engagement in that region. And we need to move on from those areas or those places where we have been engaging in the past, because this is going to be the engine of global growth. This is going to be the engine of supply chain. So we have to diversify our supply chain. We have to engage in those countries, because right now we see that India is already in the heart of that cooperation in that region. So getting into the new markets, getting in, trying to access new platforms, I think is very important. And we must not turn our eyes away from all
Okay.
these developments in
All
that
right,
region.
Qamar, Cheema, I understand completely, and I think your point of view is extremely well understood and well received. Before I go towards leverage and shared growth, I'd like to understand something about the climate commitments of both China and the United States of America. Both have had very strong commitments pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. Do you feel both countries can, if not in other areas, can they work together as far as climate change is concerned and have a unified view on that?
Well, I think as far as this environmental issues are concerned, there are various levels to see this. For example, the Americans and the Chinese, they are both the part of the problem as far as when it comes to the carbon emissions. One thing. Secondly, the Americans and the Chinese are systematically and continuously investing so that they can transform or convert their entire industry and how to promote clean energy and how to invest that. So both the countries are putting a lot of investment and money into all these areas. But at the same time, what they need to do is that how to look at those areas or how to look at those countries which cannot afford to transform their energy dependence, where countries like Pakistan and many other, which definitely needs global support. Because the countries like Pakistan, we have seen floods, and we have been saying that our contribution into these carbon emissions is not much, but we are being affected by all that climatic changes which has come. So what Shri Rehman worked on, this loss and damage fund. So I think those areas and those countries which cannot afford and they cannot pay much for how to minimize the threats of these environmental changes. These countries need to invest there, and they need to build a global consensus. And for example, the areas or arrangements like COP 27, which is, I think, the conference, I think, which is going to be in Abu Dhabi. That's where the commitment needs to come from both the countries and their other partners, so that all these developing countries like ours, they can get benefit from China and the United States because of their commitments. Millions of people's lives could be saved, and the global planet could be more beautiful.
Now, Qamar, also, you talked about leverage, you talked about shared growth. I really like the terms, and I think the China is working diligently towards that. But I would also like to, divert your attention towards the Asia-Pacific strategy of the United States of America, of which India is a huge part, but China isn't. Do you feel that could change following these talks, that could be modified following these talks? Do you feel that in the context of the APEC leaders meeting as well, the role that the US has had in influencing trade policies or driving economic growth in the Asia-Pacific region, are these going to have implications on China? Will there be a discussion between the Chinese and the US side on these implications as well?
Well, I think in my understanding, this platform is very important, but it's not everything for all these countries in the region, because the Indian side have shown so much concern. They have not agreed to the framework of this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation in much of the framework. So in my understanding, the Americans and the Chinese, obviously they can create a sort of consensus that how they have to move on. But at the same time, I think whatever the outcome of this meeting of the President Xi Jinping and President Biden comes, we will see that how the world receives that. And how it is going to impact the countries in the region, because majority of the countries they're looking that more of the time all these countries are interested in expanding their military footprints rather than their economic footprints. So I think good messaging is required for the entire region, and at the same time they need to win the entire region, that they are not going to make this entire region a conflict, rather than a new world of cooperation and a new world of development will be there.
But that is what China is going for. Shared growth has always wanted to do that. Economically strong world, economically strong region, and that is what is the need of the day as well. But when you see conflicts such as what is happening in Palestine, which is happening between Russia and Ukraine, do you feel these talks could lead to some kind of leeway or some kind of headway as far as leading to a some kind of solution to these crises is concerned? Because I'm sure that China and the US might talk economy, but they will definitely, I am sure, I mean, this is my, I'm not completely sure, but this is what I feel, that they will also be discussing the geopolitical and geostrategic arena that is engulfing the world.
Well, I think the Chinese do not get so much politicized, and they don't want to get involved in the political issues much unless they are asked for. For example, in this recent Iran-Saudi rapprochement, they helped, but only they are saying that we are only here to resolve the matters, to contribute for peace. So if you have seen, the Chinese have not come up so much openly for supporting Palestine or getting against Israel. So they will keep these points with them, and whenever they have to settle the score with the Americans, they will come up that, okay, this is what you have been doing in the past. That's your contribution in Afghanistan. This is your contribution in Iraq. This is your contribution in Middle East. So whatever is happening, I think the Chinese side, they're registering all these points, and they will use that whenever the American side will directly target. So right now the Chinese are not paying much attention that, and they don't want to, they don't want the Americans or the other countries to raise eyebrows because of any kind of political statements that come from Beijing that could be problematic. So we have not seen any unusual statement from Beijing. We have seen usual statements which every country is giving on these recent conflicts. So I think the Chinese are deliberately very soft, and they are not paying much attention because they believe that the Americans will highlight and will be very careful in case they believe that the Chinese are taking some political, giving political statements, and it means they can be more active in any region against the American interest. So Chinese are registering the points. They will use it when they have to respond to the United States in any kind of, if there is any bilateral meeting. Otherwise, they're all silent. And they don't want to disturb the Americans, and they don't want to create a problem for themselves, and they don't want to target the Americans. So that's where the many countries in the global south, they look China not as a very active member and not as a country being a member of the P5. They are silent. They are not that active, and particularly in this Ukraine-Russia conflict, they completely supported Russia. So that's also one way how the great powers they look for their interests rather than going for a global moral values always.
Last question, I want a very short answer. There are three important key issues that are going to be addressed in this APEC meeting, and there are 21 countries that include the US and China, and that is digital connectivity, sustainable energy, economic growth. Which of the three is the most important point that needs to be highlighted during the course of this meet?
This is basically a digital battle between Chinese and the Americans, and the US and Chinese big tech companies. They are looking that this is a $1 trillion market. So they are focusing more on AI. They are focusing on e-commerce sectors. They are focusing on social media boom. So I think the Americans and the Chinese, they are all looking into this digital battle. That is where both countries are going to engage. So I think this is an evolving situation. Things are yet to be set, and as I mentioned, the Americans are going to de-risk where much of the exports or the export control regimes are being established, so that the Chinese side do not get much from Americans. So let's see how they fight these digital battle, particularly in this big tech area, as this is a market, as I mentioned, of $1 trillion, in particularly in Southeast Asia, and who gets what and what share they get from this particular battle.
That 21 countries are getting together. They are discussing sustainable energy. They are discussing digital connectivity. They are discussing economic growth. Let's hope it leads to positive developments. And the most positive development that I see is the meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. The world is looking towards it, and the world is looking towards a positive development as far as that is concerned. Thank you very much, Qamar Cheema Saab, to have joined us, foreign affairs expert Qamar Cheema, joining us online, discussing, of course, the APEC meeting, and of course, the most important aspect of it is the meet between Xi Jinping, who is in the US, and Joe Biden, who is the US president. Let's come to our last three stories. The first concerns India, where there's a tunnel that has been closed in Uttarakhand. Protests have broken out in the state, where emergency workers are making efforts to rescue at least 40 workers who have been trapped inside a collapsed tunnel for more than 78 hours. 78 hours, ladies and gentlemen, is a huge time, and the fact is also that the air, the oxygen inside of those tunnels is also, it's very important whether there is some kind of an oxygen supply there or not. How are they surviving? Are there some kind of food or water supplies that are present there for those workers or not? What is the present state? Nobody knows at this moment, and that is why the protests are emanating, because not much headway has gone as far as liberating or taking those workers outside of this tunnel who are trapped inside those tunnel is concerned. Now the demonstrations began after the main machine that was being used to dig inside the rubble to reach the workers broke down, and that is why people were extremely angry as to why the machinery is not working the way it needs to. Initial reports say that the collapse has been caused by a landslide, but an investigation is underway. We will update you as and when we do get more news as far as that is concerned. We wish that those workers who are trapped inside do get out safely. Then we'll be talking about North Korea, ladies and gentlemen, that has tested new solid fuel engines for intermediate ballistic missile. This has been confirmed by the media agency KCNA. The country has developed a new type, high-thrust solid fuel engines for intermediate ballistic missiles, again, which are of important strategic significance, is what the statement says. The test provides a sure guarantee for reliably accelerating the development of the new type IRBM systems. These tests took place between the 11th and the 14th of November. Well, a lot of developments there as well, and this is not the first time that we are seeing North Korea moving towards that arena. Finally, we will end with environmental pollution, rather air pollution as well. We talked about what has been happening in New Delhi, in Kolkata and Mumbai, with those cities becoming extremely polluted. But we are now, after a little lull in which the air pollution in Lahore became a bit better because of rains, it has come back with a bang. The smog in country's second largest city, Lahore, has risen to dangerous levels. Punjab government has ordered that schools, offices, malls and parks in 3 cities including Lahore be closed until Saturday. The fact also is that a lot of farmers do burn crops, and that is also what adds to this smog. Many people are extremely worried for the children, for the school-going children, for those who go to offices, and a lot of health hazards that are also related to this air pollution and the smog, whether it be in the terms of lung diseases, whether it be in terms of heart diseases, or even throat and flu-like infections. These are rampant in the region because of such smog-like situations. Let's hope that some kind of solution, and a permanent one at that, comes so that in the future we can avoid such situations from happening in Lahore and in other areas, and I also hope in New Delhi, Kolkata and Mumbai. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new story segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.